Hello, horror fans. I'm Ghastly.
I'm gruesome.
And today we are going to be watching The Wicker Man. Not the one from 2006 with Nicolas Cage screaming about the bees.
Yes.
This is from 1973. It is a British folk horror movie. It's also a musical. It's directed by Robin Hardy. The screenplay was by Anthony Schaefer, and it is inspired by the 1967 novel Ritual. But it is not actually an adaptation of the novel. It just took the idea.
So when I mean, and this all came out of, I asked Peter, okay, so what do people say is the Citizen Kane of horror movies? And and he told me The Wicker Man, and I was like...
Specifically, it's the Citizen Kane of folk horror because it's one of the three movies that kicked off the subgenre.
Interesting.
Well, okay, so let's get a brief definition here. Folk horror is exactly what it sounds like. It's horror based on old folklore.
Yeah.
It's been argued it's a type of religious horror, think The Exorcist or The Rite.
Yeah.
But it's more interested in the old folkloric rituals than in the rites and the exorcisms and organized faiths. So a lot of things, and a lot of them are based on or inspired by or directly ripping off Wicker Man, are... Here's this cult of old pagans who have had to cut themselves off from the world because the world doesn't accept their different ways, and as a result, their ways have become different and warped and monstrous. And now someone who's an outsider, maybe a devout Christian, stumbles upon them and is at first horrified because they're different, and then finds out, nope, they're actually horrific. The other two movies that made the unholy trinity of folk horror. Shut up.
Hulk Hogan. Ooh yeah.
Folk horror are The Blood on Satan's Claw and The Witchfinder General, released in America as The Conqueror Worm. And of course, The Wicker Man with Christopher Lee. So yeah, this is a seminal movie.
I just realized my joke earlier. I got my wrestlers mixed up, but it's fine.
You're a sad person.
I got my professional wrestlers mixed up.
I wouldn't have known if you hadn't told me.
Oh, now the audience knows.
Yeah. So yeah, this movie was released in 1973, and there's some interesting stuff about it. We will be watching the final cut. So when it was originally released, the studio executives said this was the worst movie they'd ever worked with. They hated the ending. They hated the subject matter. And they cut over 12 minutes of footage. Against the director and actor's wishes. That was the theatrical cut. Then almost 10 years later, there was something released called the director's cut that wasn't actually a director's cut. It was just someone found 10 minutes of footage, spliced it back in where it belonged, and said this is the director's cut. Several years later, in, the early 80s, the director actually released the director's cut, which he titled The Final Cut, because everyone had already seen something called the director's cut, and that's what we'll be watching. It has some of the missing footage, but it's closer in length to the theatrical cut because he wanted to actually edit it to work like a movie. One interesting thing about this, other than the executive meddling and the terrible remake, is that, A, the filmmakers did a stupefying amount of research on this. They wanted it to be as accurate to pagan British rituals and beliefs as they possibly could. Now, a lot of their research came from a book called The Golden Bough, which was almost a decade and a half later largely held to be inaccurate and made up by a British guy.
Oh.
But it was accurate to the beliefs at the time, and as you'll see in the movie, the fact that the rituals are closer to a British aristocrat's idea of paganism than actual paganism makes sense thematically. So it accidentally worked in their benefit. But when this was released, it was the single most accurate movie featuring British paganism, even though it used them for horror. The other interesting thing is they were going to, when they re-released the director's cut, quote-unquote,
right.
It was going to be re-released in November of 1978 in the U.S., but they pushed it back to January because Jonestown happened.
Oh.
And a lot of people didn't think it was a good idea to release a movie about a isolated cult doing horrible, screwed up, sacrificial stuff out in the middle of nowhere right after Jonestown.
Makes sense.
So they pushed it back to January, and the PR disaster was averted. So,
I'm very interested to see this. I'm interested to see whether it actually
holds up.
Yeah, whether it's actually like really scary or because like,
one thing that's worth noting is the actor playing the main character deliberately, because the director kept offering to show him the titular Wicker Man, and he kept saying, no, I don't want to see it until my character sees it at the end. So when we get to his reaction to seeing the thing, that was actually the actor's reaction to seeing the Wicker Man.
That's interesting because films are filmed out of order, though.
They were building the Wicker Man. This thing was shot on an almost non-existent budget. They were building the Wicker Man while they were filming the other scenes.
So they had to film it last.
Yeah.
Okay.
Also, as you'll see why, they can only get one take with the Wicker Man.
Because I've heard of a lot of movies that film the end, like, right at the beginning.
No, they filmed this almost at the very end. I think they did a couple of scenes afterwards, but this was almost the final thing because they were building it while making the movie. There was almost no budget for this thing.
Interesting.
But yeah, let's check out, unless there's anything else you had to say or wonder?
No.
All right.
Let's get into it.
Let's check out 1973's The Wicker Man. And we're back.
So, I like this.
Oh yeah, it's good, right?
It's a good movie. I feel like, and I was just talking about this right before we started recording, I feel like it could have benefited because it is a very slow burn, and I'm fine with that. But like, I wish it had taken certain moments to show a little bit more
of the pagan symbolism and stuff.
Yeah, and indicate a little bit more, because the problem I had with it was like it just was him going to certain locations and asking, "Where's this girl?" and people are
around basically.
Yeah, they're all messing him around.
Well, but part of that is the brilliance, because if you don't know going into it, and seriously, there's massive spoilers here. But if you don't know going into it, it really does make you think at first that the girl's been killed, and then that they're going to sacrifice the girl. And up until almost the last minute, you don't realize it's a trap to sacrifice him. The horror, it is a horror movie, but the true horror of it doesn't hit you until that last 15 minutes.
And I get it because it's all about solving a mystery. I don't know. I was a little frustrated by it because I think the scariest parts of this were like the things associated with the religion and the weird
paganism, when they show up in the masks.
And then the masks was legitimately one of the scariest parts.
That moment when he goes out to the plane and all of a sudden these people just start popping over the fence looking at him in these creepy animal masks.
It reminded me of the ads for Pet Sematary that happened.
Sure, yeah. Or that movie that came out a while back that I want us to watch at some point, You're Next, where people are being hunted by people in animal masks. And again, the influence of this film cannot be understated.
Yeah, I even recognize that certain elements of the burning of the Wicker Man like bleed into like YouTube culture, because they have like if any of you have spent any amount of time on the internet, you know about the pseudo horror weird amalgamation of things series, Don't Hug Me, I'm Scared.
Oh yeah.
And one episode on that. I forget which episode it is, but it's like the third or fourth one.
Oh right, the one where he gets lured into the sex cult.
Yes.
And they almost sacrifice him. Yeah, that was a giant shout out to
And the very end of it, they're burning the
Yeah, that was literally a shout out to Wicker Man.
Yeah.
The band Radiohead, in one of my favorite songs of theirs, Burn the Witch, does a little claymation people version of Wicker Man.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, it's adorable. Like, they do it in the style of that old TV show, Here Comes Naughty, if you ever remember that one.
Yeah.
Only Wicker Man. So
everyone's playing all these. Everyone's a good actor in this, and everyone's really dedicated really dedicated to their parts.
I remember you didn't think you were, and nobody ever does, myself included, does understand like how it could possibly work that it's a musical horror movie.
Yeah,
and it does work.
It's less of a musical, and it's more of
it's not a Broadway musical.
It's a show with music.
It's not a Broadway musical.
The same way
to convey emotions.
Yeah, the same way Warhorse is not a musical. It is a play with music.
Sure, because none of the characters are singing a song about, oh, what I really want to do is this and that and the other thing, or, oh, I shall have my this, that, and the other thing, and my internal thoughts are this. They're just singing songs because they're a pagan culture in 70s Britain, so they're singing a bunch of old folk songs about nature, while dancing naked around fires, or sitting naked on top of a grave and weeping, or having an orgy in the middle of the park at midnight.
I forget which culture Warhorse is. I think it's Irish, but like it's Irish folk songs in that. So my comparison is sort of similar in that vein. But like, yeah, it works because it's not trying to be a musical.
Well, and also what you said earlier with the slow burn. Even before the true horror of first the animal masks, then the bizarre pagan ritual, then us thinking someone's been beheaded, then them burning him.
I think
there's this overall sense of wrongness and creepiness on the island because nothing makes sense.
I think the best sense of foreshadowing we get before the big click hits is when he's looking at it's not the children dancing, it's before that. It's
the orgy in the park?
The orgy in the park, and then the girl weeping on the grave. Because that kind of came out of nowhere. All the music cuts out.
Yep, and you just have this weird, awkward, uncomfortable. It's the most
he's just walking
moment you're ever gonna see of a very attractive, slim woman with big breasts, completely naked. But she's weeping hysterically on a grave, and all the music cuts out all at once, and you have no idea why it's being focused on.
It cuts out, and it's just him walking beside these scenes, and it's like one of the creepiest images in the movie because it comes out of nowhere. It takes away elements of our senses, so we're caught off guard.
Right.
So.
And good horror is good at taking something that should be pleasant and making it not.
Yeah.
Sexuality should be something that's, at the very least, pleasant. If not explicitly sexy or fun, it should at least be not bad. This makes it really uncomfortable. You empathize with this buttoned-up, puritanical, close-minded Christian fellow. He was more sympathetic when the movie was made back in the 70s to the modern audiences. He does come off as a little prudish and bigoted, although his distrust of the pagans turns out to be completely merited, considering they do human sacrifice.
This is an ooky spooky cult.
Yes.
Ooky spooky.
I mentioned earlier the fact that the Golden Bough was later argued to be slightly discredited and made up by a British guy makes sense when you consider that the pagan worship that they're practicing on Summer Isle Island was made up by the great-grandfather or by the grandfather of Lord Summer Isle to control the populace.
Yeah, so it's not
it really is just
it's not far removed enough for any of it to be
right. It's not them saying this. It's not the filmmaker saying this is how pagans were. It's the filmmaker saying this is how a crazed British monarch or lord would control people using the trappings of paganism. I think since you didn't with the slow burn, you're gonna like when we get to it. Because I want us to get to all three eventually of the Unholy Trinity.
Yeah.
When we get to Witchfinder General, you're gonna like that because that one gets to the unpleasantness right quick.
Oh my goodness.
That gets real unpleasant. Well, it's about a Witchfinder General.
Yeah.
Is there anything else that can be said about this?
I don't know. I should. A brilliant performance from a very young Christopher Lee.
Oh yeah. Christopher Lee, when he was alive, said this was one of his favorite films. He thinks this is one of his finest performances.
He plays it with very much naturalism. There's no there's no air of late Christopher Lee career.
Right, he's not playing a vampire. He's not playing Dracula. He's not playing
Count Dooku.
He's playing... Well, even Count Dooku was more naturalistic than you'd think, given the universe he's in.
Okay, yes, but
But yeah, no, I get what you're saying.
His character is not built...
No, Lord Summerisle is a human.
Oddly enough, in this movie, he's not as built outlandish as he could be.
Because, again, with the slow burn and the reveal, you have to think Summerisle is just an eccentric leader and then maybe an accessory to conspiracy to murder.
He's really just... It's funny because he's really just the straight man of this island.
And yet, he masterminded a human sacrifice. There's that brilliant bit near the end where the protagonist, the sergeant, points out, Summerisle, if your crops don't return, if this doesn't bring your apples back, they're gonna sacrifice you.
Oh yeah,
and there was a sequel made called The Wicker Tree, which isn't terribly good. It was lambasted for having flat performances, dull writing, and only featuring Christopher Lee in a flashback scene that seemed largely just to be able to say, hey, we have Christopher Lee. The only thing of note about it is the flashback reveals that Summerisle did in fact have to flee the island because the crops failed next year.
Wow.
And he's like, oh, I'm going to leave because they are totally going to burn me alive. And it's a shame the rest of the film... That's the only good scene in the film. You can watch the scene with Christopher Lee in it and be like, well, that's good enough for me. So the guy who played the protagonist was an actor by the name of Edward Albert Arthur Woodward, who passed away in 2009. He's a well-known British actor. He played Sergeant Howie in The Wicker Man. He was a British spy in the titular series. He was the main character in the British spy series Callan. He was Robert McCallum in the series The Equalizer from the U.S., and he's one of the villains in Hot Fuzz.
I haven't seen Hot Fuzz in so long, I have to rewatch it.
But you know what I mean? So it's
yeah.
He said that the moment when they put him into the Wicker Man and set it on fire was the single most terrifying moment of his entire acting career.
Yeah, and I'm thinking to myself, oh, he's in a separate, smaller wooden room. To look like it's built into the thing.
But in the initial shot where they're putting him up inside of it and then setting him on fire, that's actually him, actually in a giant wooden man, actually being set on fire.
It's crazy because I'm thinking to myself, how long does it take for that to go up in flames?
I mean, it's thick wood, and I assume that some parts of it were wetted to keep it from that. I don't know. You gotta recall all the insanity and abuses that went down during the production of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
Okay, well...
This was made the year before that. Granted, in England, but for a lower budget with a different producer. So, you had mentioned that 73 was a good year for horror
because the
Wicker
Exorcist
Man and The Exorcist both came out, and then the next year in 74, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre came out.
My dad told me, and it's the image of the Flash in like the dream or the nightmare sequence or whatever from that movie. Or I don't remember what it comes.
Which movie are we talking about? Still
The
Exorcist? Right. What are we talking about?
When
we see Pazuzu.
When we see that one flash of the face on the screen.
Yeah, that was him possessing something. But yeah, I know what you're talking about.
That is what my dad told me. I couldn't get that out of my head for days. He was small when he went to see that movie because he went to see it in theaters. He told me about it. We'll get to that eventually.
Oh yeah.
But anything else to say about this?
It's influential, it's impressive, it helps spawn a genre, it keeps getting imitated, to the point where I'm certain some of the people imitating it don't realize what it is they're imitating an imitator.
I don't think it deserves a remake.
It got remade, and the remake was awful.
I think it deserves a worthy spin-off or adaptation, though.
So it was supposed to be a trilogy.
Yeah.
But the sequel was awful. And then the director died.
Oh.
And there were plans to maybe do a TV series, but he was dead, and honestly,
I feel like
stand where it is. It said everything it could say.
Fair enough.
The final shot of the neo-pagans dancing and singing joyfully about summer returning as our hero screams in agony as he burns to death in the sunset. What more can you say? That's horrific.
I feel like it might not have a good horror sequel or prequel to it, but it might have a good, like, weird, dramatic
Oh, you want to see, like,
prequel?
how the original Lord Summerisle made the island what it is.
Yeah.
The grandfather character who came there and paganized everybody. That could be interesting.
And maybe slightly horrifying?
It could. It runs the risk. It'd have to be done well. Horror prequels are hard to do right because it runs the risk of it being a series of winks at the original or of making the villain too sympathetic. Like when they did the prequel Hannibal Rising and they made Hannibal Lecter the good-looking teenage Nazi hunter, who also is a samurai. I'm not making that up. They did that.
Oh my goodness. That's so bad for so many reasons.
Yep.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, that's bad. Or when they did the sequel to the prequel to the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, where they revealed that Baby Leatherface was abused by his mom and she made him kill his bestest friend, and that's why he turned into Leatherface.
Oh, that's the same thing that Rob Zombie tried to do with Michael Myers.
Yeah, which is dumb. We don't need to know what made the monster a monster. They're a monster.
Fair. I feel like with
this one it might work.
This one it might work only because you're building on the elements of the pagan religion, not
and the corrupted pagan religion, and the fact that they don't start sacrificing. It could work, but you'd have to be smart about it.
Yeah, you'd have to hire some really smart writers.
Yeah, you would. It'd be. The more I think about this, the more I think it could be interesting to do, though. It could. I was going to say something before you mentioned that this could get some good sequels, though. No, I think that's about everything that can be said.
All right. Well, next week we're going to have a special guest.
We are, and that one we're doing.
Yeah, we're also going to
sequels.
We're doing. Speaking of sequels, we're going to finish off the Ring trilogy. We're going to do Ring 2 and Rings.
Lord deliver us all.
They came out.
We'll get to it when the episode comes out.
Yeah.
The point is,
we're doing the 2 Ring sequels. We're finishing it off.
I've never been so sad.
So, Peter, have you seen Ring 2 or Rings?
I saw the trailer for both of them, and I tried to watch Ring 2, but I couldn't. Yeah, no, this is you getting to show me something for once.
They're just dumb.
They are. They'll never top the Japanese one where they used a softcore porn actress to play the ghost girl, though. And kept making her get naked.
That's fair. Me and our special guest, who's going to come next week, whose name we haven't decided yet.
Yeah, we'll figure it out.
We had fun seeing the third one in theaters. Mostly because it was dumb and we cracked jokes in the movie theater all the time, but like...
Oh, so you're those people.
Oh, no, we whisper to each other.
Oh, so you're those people. Anyway, this has been The Wicker Man. Brilliant performances, interesting soundtrack, creepy effects. Just, you can see why it left such an impact.
Yeah.
Alright, I have been ghastly.
I have been gruesome. If you go to a Broadway theater, turn your phone off!
Yeah.
Sorry,
Okay.
I just needed to add that. Anyway.
Jesus wept. Good night, everybody.
Good night, everyone.